Welcome to a new episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. Today we have Rick Patterson, who's going to be telling us about his work trying to work, how people are polarized right now in the political spectrum. So we want to discuss what are the ways that he thinks we can talk to people who we might disagree on, and has been the insights that he's found through his work. Can you give us a background? What you've been doing with this purpose, and what is the main point that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the main, I'm a chemical engineer by training. I also have a master's and doctoral degree in ministry. But one of the things I'm working on right now is looking at specifically inclusion. I'm the adoptive father of four black kids. So that's been an interesting journey because I am basically what one might consider to be the stereotypical white conservative American man. I'm a cattle farmer. I work in corporate America. I'm an evangelical Christian, so I have all the earmarks of somebody that's in conservative white America. Yet one of the things I've learned a lot actually after through the adoption of our four kids, about the importance of humility as we face each other. And so one of the first things that I worked through in my first book had to do with how shame motivates and manipulates our lives, and how I learned a lot about humility and about overcoming shame through the process of our adoption.
So you can tell us about your two books or all literature that you have written, but I want to share something with you. So I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and telling people lately that the Mexican culture is very traditional and very like shame-based, in the sense of you're a bad person if you don't do what your parents or your grandparents or what society requires of you. And what I've seen about American culture is that it's very success-based, and that the shame comes from being a loser or someone that doesn't match their expectations on the financial and the physical and like superficial stuff, versus more of the moral and the capacity to live a righteous life, whatever, in the more traditional sense. An evangelical, do you see both of those things at play, or is it mostly about being able to have a big house and provide for your family, as I've experienced growing up in this?
What I've experienced is that shame will show up however shame fits best in each individual culture. So I totally agree with you that for us, oftentimes in North America, shame is driven by our inability to be what we call successful. And we think that that means that somehow defines us. If we have failed, we are therefore a failure. Looking at it morally, for example, from a Christian perspective, or from a perspective of a different culture, the idea is that if you've done something bad, that means you're a bad person. And that's where shame really starts to get its leverage. Is it defines us, our success, our drive, our results, our moral wins or our moral losses. All those things define who we are. So sometimes even the quote unquote good stuff in our lives, the success that we're experiencing, we still find as some sort of moral failure, because we're not as successful as we should be. We're not as good as we should be. And all those things are shame-based thinking. And it just sort of morphs regardless, it just into a different form based on your culture, your background, your race, your gender. I saw very, very different forms of it from my black kids, for example, and we grew up in the same house.
So can you tell us about where in Christianity did it creep in that success was a marker of being blessed by God? Because if you read the teachings of Jesus and the prophets, success comes from serving God, from being kind to others. Even Jesus says that your riches are in heaven. Where did it become this? Is it the Protestant thing? Is it the Catholic imperial thing of the more you amass, the more God is glorified through what you're doing? Like, how can things be so especially if evangelical Christians claim to follow the Bible?
Yeah, so really what that is, I have a saying that says we all read and hear what we want to hear. And that's true of all humanity. And so what's happened is in North America, Christians, we've needed to hear that success means that we are following Christ. It's not in there. There are random passages, unfortunately, that do imply such a thing. So even Jesus himself, when he says, rich people have a hard time getting into heaven. You can't hard camel through the eye of a needle, sort of thing. And Peter says, we gave up everything to follow you. And Jesus himself says, oddly, anything you've given up for me, you will get 100-fold back. Jesus said that. If you've given up a house, you'll get 100 houses. You give up family, you'll get 100 families. In this life, those are Jesus's own words. The problem is we take one passage, to your exact point, and we make an entire theology of it. And that's not what he intended. It's not what he meant. To your exact point, if you look at the total life of Jesus in the total context of the Bible, that thing that Jesus said never happened. Peter did give up everything. Jesus gave up everything. They didn't get 100-fold back in this life. They got crucified, right? They embraced poverty. That's what they did. So what we do is we tend to grab one little Bible verse that supports our view of life, and we say, there, it's biblical. So there are random passages that suggest it to be the case, but what we're doing in North America is what we do as humans. We find things that prove our case, that make us feel good about ourselves, and make us feel it's okay to be this way. And it just is, it's inaccurate.
I read an article written by you or about your family situation when you adopted your children. Can you tell us what was the impetus to do this? I know that the African American community might feel that there's some white savior complex when it comes down to um, raising children that are not part of your culture. Is that what was taking place, or was it a genuine desire to give a home to your children?
Well, I think white savior complex is a real thing. I don't dismiss that. And it certainly always seems to look that way. Even if it's not genuinely that way, it always seems to look that way. It always sort of seems to look like, anyway, that the white people are going to save black kids. And what I felt is just the grotesqueness of that, because it invalidates the entire child's experience. Um, but it's there. It is definitely present. And when we adopted our kids, we were sort of hailed as heroes, right? Hey, you're doing good, you're being good. But the reality was this: is that they were friends of the family. Their grandma was ill with cancer. She was their primary caretaker. Mom was in jail. Dads were off, and they didn't know their dads really. And so we were just watching the kids when grandma would go in for chemo on weekends. And eventually, grandma died, and they needed the kids to go into a foster home. The only way to keep them all together. So my wife and I, we applied for foster parent license, and we started to foster parent the kids. They tried to reunite the kids with their parents, and it didn't work out. So they became wards of the state, and so we adopted them. The reality is, they were just kids that needed help, you know, and they were kids that needed a place to live. But here's the part we miss. I was also a man who needed to learn what those kids had to teach me about humility, about shame, about what they experience in life as adopted people, but also what they experience in life as black people. And what they taught me totally obliviates the idea of white savior complex, because they came into my life to teach me things. Now, would we have done it whether they're white or black or Hispanic? Sure, they're kids. They need a home. So we did what we could with some kids that were in our circumstance, if that makes sense.
What about the opposite idea that we fetishize people by making them so unique and so special because they're from a group that we're not very familiar with or unknown, and then we prop them up as some type of romanticized version of what a human being is versus just seeing them as regular people like everybody else. I believe that the conservative movement has a case to make that, there's only one race, is the human race, but the actual expression of that becomes dismissive of everybody's unique things they bring to the table.
What I've seen is that it does happen, right? We can idealize people. However, what I see happening more often than not is we dehumanize people. We dehumanize groups of people. We call them collectively, we call them rapists, thugs, and we lump minority groups into dehuman characterizations of people. It's much more rare that we idolize somebody who's in a minority position. And I think even here, shame is driving even this because generally speaking, as people, we all want to look better than the person we're standing beside. And so if we find a way to dehumanize an entire group of people in this weird way, it makes us look better. We think it makes us look better because we're not in that group of people. So I do believe that there's danger in idolizing any individual person or any group of people. But I think that the real damage that's being done is in dehumanizing, the opposite, dehumanizing minority groups of people, or I should say, people not in power, because sometimes the people in power can actually be the minority also. And what's fascinating is it seems like we all collectively need somebody to hate. We need somebody to be against. It's just the feeling that's in the air, right? And if we can all come together against somebody we hate, it brings a group together, even better than being for somebody we love. So I think the real danger here is in dehumanizing people who don't have power, whether they're a minority or not. That's the real danger.
And my biggest pet peeve with that they humanize the white folks who are the majority of the population because of power or because they have parent privilege, but they forget that there are poor whites, that there are whites that are not fully accepted. My family was considered white in Mexico, but here we're not considered white. Jews are not considered white by neo-Nazis. People who were considered white at one point, now they're considered brown. There's all kinds of caveats and issues in whole anti-patriarchy, anti-imperialism, anti-white mentality does the same thing. The same thing that people hate now is being turned against what people consider oppressors, but you're not even giving them a chance. And you're losing a lot of allies by the way that you demonize a whole group of people, just the same thing that people are complaining about.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I followed that. I don't feel as though, I'm not sure this is what you're suggesting, that my attempt is to dehumanize white people either. My attempt is to say that when we dehumanize anybody, because I entirely agree with you, we will find any reason we can to dehumanize any person. I think a lot of in our culture, especially in politics, a lot of the people who find themselves to be, say, gay or transgender are white. And we will pick that instead of their race, for example. Poverty, right now, we've basically purged a great deal of the aid, right, to that are people who are Medicaid recipients. A lot of them, most of them are white. And we dehumanize them, white people, and we say things like, well, they're just out to game the system. You know what I'm saying? We collectively put them together as bad people because then it makes us feel better about not being generous. So I don't know that there's any one factor, skin color especially, that picks or decides why we choose to dehumanize people.
I wasn't talking about you and what you've been sharing. I was talking about the so-called woke movement or the more leftist stance on the world can be as hateful and dismissive as the right, from what I've seen. Do you also feel? I saw in the article that you mentioned people getting their identity based on their politics can be very dangerous, because it's almost like a sports game where you're just rooting for a cause, and you don't really care about the in between people, or the people who could be good on the other side. Like you're just making it winner make wins all kind of situation. So they keep passing the ball around between the Democrats and the Republicans, but we don't see a unity that is needed for the country to move forward.
No, you're exactly right. Is that every group will most likely attempt to dehumanize the other group, and clearly that's what's happening for in North American politics, Republican versus Democrat. And there's clearly evidence that both sides are trying to dehumanize the opposite side. No question about it. You could easily say as well, to your point in the woke movement. I mean, I've seen things saying that every white person is bad, every white person is out to get you. Clearly that's not true. I mean, statistically, it's not even possible, right? So, but I think what we're trying to do, because all that rhetoric, all that language gets people on it gets votes, to put it politically. It gets votes. When we can collect people around us who have the same kind of anger at people, it gets us elected. And I'm using that in terms of whether it's within the power of any particular group, a woke group or a conservative group. If we can solidify our agenda of who we are against, that's what will drive votes. That's what shame insists. That's what drives votes.
What do you think about the idea that if someone is white, Christian, privileged in whatever way, because the one thing that people forget is that the reason that the Caucasian Americans have more access is because they've been here longer officially. I know the Native Americans have been here longer. I know that African population was by force, but the people who founded and developed this country were mostly European. They have access to things, and they have a connection with each other that a lot of immigrants don't. That position of privilege gives you the opportunity to do a lot of good, and to be an ally to good causes, and to represent good values. So in the case of supporting your children, you did something that anybody else in that situation would do, and it was successful to the point of you being able to provide for them, give them education, and give them opportunities. So how can anybody fault that some of my children who are half German American, half Spanish Mexican, I tell them the problem is not being white, the problem is what do you do with being white. So if you are like an abolitionist, the white people who fought for slave rights, then you are a good white person. You can't just condemn all white people, because there was a lot of people who did a lot of positive stuff during the civil rights movement, during the suffragettes. So you can't just say that everything that white people have done has been destructive. If we have a functioning society and we have safety, something that we don't have in home countries, do you find some truth in that?
My own experience is this. I am an advocate of racial bias and prejudice in the world. And here's what's interesting. In corporate America, what they normally do is they'll bring through a black person to tell us white people why we're being racially prejudiced and biased. Now, when we see a black person walk in the room to tell us what's wrong with us, we immediately put up our dukes. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to listen. But to your exact point, what I've learned is that in that group, if I, Rick, white guy, give the same message, and I talk about what my kids have seen, and I talk about my own bias and prejudice, suddenly that same group of people will hear the same message, and they'll hear it well. And the reason they'll hear it, to your exact point, is because I'm white. And so I will absolutely leverage the fact that I am white in order to talk to white people about racial bias and prejudice actually looks like in the world. And so I will absolutely leverage my privilege with that group of people, the trust they have in me because I'm white. You know, same thing might happen with, in education. I believe that there are schools that need people of color, teachers, because it will engage a group of people differently than an all white school will. And so I think it's very important for all of us to leverage whatever it is we have, whether we're rich, poor, black, white, tall, short, in order to engage the people who will listen to us for good.
And what would you say to someone who would compare apartheid South Africa to the US and say, look, when I came in 1995, Black people were 14% of the population. 30 years later, they're still 14% of the population. If you think about it, they either got killed, thrown in jail, or somehow through abortion or some other type of means of keeping them from having too many children, they are not growing as a community. So that there is a caste system that is still in place, and that certain groups are being oppressed to the point of letting them succeed and become what they've been promised. Would you say that that has any merit, or that's a conspiracy theory?
Well, I can't relate it to apartheid. I'm just not an expert in apartheid, so I apologize for that. However, your point that that the black population is only 14% of our population, I think nobody even knows that. I think that a lot of times in our culture, the white conservative America feels like we're being overrun, right? But to your exact point, it's a very small part of our population. It's not a growing part of our population. And I think everybody we've been trained to think that that this group of people is outpopulating, they're going to overrun us, they're going to overtake us. And I think that's a very common story that we tell ourselves to make ourselves afraid of any minority. I'll give you another example. I remember when I was a teenager, right? The big fear then was that Japan was going to buy our whole country. Japan was buying all the businesses in North America. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it was all about, we were so afraid that Japan was just going to, and we had to stop. We stopped selling business. We stopped selling land to Japan. And now guess what? Japan's our best friend, but now guess who we hate? China, right? China's buying all our land. And now guess who we're against, right? We're against Latin Americans. Guess what? They're all problems. They're all immigrants. So basically, all this language sort of evolves just to give us somebody to continually be against. But what we're doing is your exact point. We're collecting all these people, whether they're Latin Americans, whether they're black, whether they're Japanese or Chinese or white. And we're saying all these people are one collective mind. And they're not. It's just not true.
What people are worried about is the child mortality rate in the Black community, and that there is a bias against suffer their pains and struggles. And that's why Black Lives Matter, even though as controversial as it was, it became for people's dignity and their ability to not profile or assume that they were all criminals, which I believe happens a lot. And if you look at what happened with police brutality throughout the US, most of the places that actually had police brutality against Americans were in the North. So this idea that the South is racist is being perpetuated, but most of the cities that had cases where Black people that were unarmed were armed were in the. So have you had those conversations with your children where they have to know how to behave around police and how to present themselves in a respectful way so then they're not targeted?
My kids now are all grown, so they were not children in my house as this has been going on. It's a great question. So to answer the question directly, I have not specifically had those conversations with them. However, they are well aware of exactly the things that you mentioned. And, I think also when it comes to things like healthcare, clearly there's evidence that the Black community struggles to get adequate health care. But I think that's also a poverty issue. To your point earlier, that's not just a Black issue, that's a poverty issue. It's that people have privilege, like I have privilege. I have money, I have a job that gives me insurance, but there are people who are struggling to even get to that point, right? And what we tend to do, as we're doing with Medicaid right now, is we're labeling all those people that we're giving Medicaid to as losers, whether they're black or white or Hispanic, doesn't matter to us. So we're pulling, and we're starting to shut down rural hospitals because of all this. We're starting to limit access to medical care to the people who need it most. And it's going to cause this exact infant mortality issues along with adult mortality issues. But it's all going to strike one group of people, and that's people below the poverty line, regardless of race.
So how would you bring about a positive change in both parties? Because a lot of us have become very disillusioned with the political system and all the money involved and all the tricks of the trade and cronyism and things like that. As a man of faith, how would you encourage other believers and people of goodwill to start turning more into compassionate, caring people for the sake of the whole populace instead of just their friends?
For me, it's not even necessarily being a man of faith, but one of the things that my kids taught me coming into my house as black children um, was the incredible power of listening. Two things, right? One is just to listen to people who don't look like you, to listen to people who don't think like you, and here's a trick, actually hear what they're saying. Don't hear what we think they're saying. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, you brought that up. Largely, when white people hear the words Black Lives Matter, we think you're telling us that we don't matter. You never said that. Nobody ever said that. That's not what was said, but it's what we hear. And the trick is this: we got to stop hearing what we think people are saying and listen to what they're actually saying. That's an incredibly important trick, but what it takes is humility. It takes a discipline to be able to think possibly that this person who is not the same socioeconomic class as you, the same color as you, maybe not the same a political spectrum as you, maybe that person actually knows something. Maybe I can learn something from that person. And that is step number one. Listen with humility. Without humility, we can't listen. We think we know it all. The other piece of it is to learn the ability to apologize. Every day you read the news all the time. Everybody wants everybody to apologize. Apologize, apologize. But the thing is, we do mess up. We make mistakes. And the ability to actually own our mistakes is something that's woefully lacking in both political parties. It's woefully lacking in any of these conflicts that are happening today. And also, the root of being able to acknowledge error, to apologize, also is found in humility. Because to be able to acknowledge, I screwed up, it takes a tremendous amount of humility to own something like that. Whether you're black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. So, for me, it's all rooted in approaching every conversation we have with somebody else from a position simple of humility, of listening and hearing what the person's actually saying, and then owning where it is that we can be better in the process.
But our society, both in the social media and in the political system, including the guy that was recently elected, it's all about narcissism, superficiality, and consumerism and capitalism. So we can talk about being kind, being humble, being caring, but it's not catching on. It's not something that is safe to become viral or exciting for people to get behind. What is the moral failing of our society when it comes down to the more narcissistic, the more popular someone?
Well, for starters, I don't know that being more narcissistic makes you more popular. In fact, a lot of times being narcissistic makes you tremendously unpopular because nobody wants to be around a narcissist. The particular narcissist you're talking about, he's got a gift. All right. And his gift is this: it's called empathy. He makes people, regardless of how narcissistic he is, and I agree he makes people feel like he cares about them. His mantra in 2016 election was, "Forgotten man, you are forgotten no more." Today, people feel heard by him. Whether or not it's true, okay, that's a whole different matter, right? But people feel like he's empathized with them. So, and that's not a narcissistic trait, the ability to have empathy. But the challenge for all of us that you've asked is, what do we do? Because it's not getting any better. It's just bad. And I don't know that it's going to be solved in sweeping reforms or things like that. It's going to be solved by two human beings across a computer through books. However, having this kind of conversation and just saying, challenging each other to be better, and one by one conversation at a time. And this is where my faith does come in, because one of the things that Jesus promised is that this road of grace, of compassion, of humility, of mercy, Jesus said this is a narrow road. It's a narrow road. Historically, it's never been easy to have these things. It's never been easy to be these things. It's never going to be easy going forward. And odds are, if we're on a wide road where there's a bunch of people in agreement with us about something, we might be on the wrong road. So I think the challenge is always going to exist, whether you're in our culture or a different culture. It's always going to be a narrow, difficult road to be a person of compassion, of mercy, of grace, and of generosity. It's always going to be a challenge. But it takes each of us individually living into that challenge, living on the way, as Jesus called it, in order to literally make us great again. Because greatness to Jesus was that person. Greatness was compassion. It was mercy. It was humility. It was kindness. It was gentleness. It was meekness. It was all these things that so often we oppose today. That is to Jesus greatness. That's what it is to be great again.
What would you say to the people who are currently maligning Martin Luther King as a Marxist plant that liberal ministers were pushing? The Negro representative of their communist and Marxist ideas. When I read his sermons and writings, the only thing I see that might be socialistic is that he wants to help poor people and that he's against the Vietnam War. But they're going bananas saying that everything about him was foreign to Christianity. And he was talking about loving your enemy, being kind to people that hate you, that only through light you can uncover darkness. And also the idea that human rights are like civil rights are human rights, that every human being deserves dignity and things like that. So it seems that his legacy is being twisted to try to fit him into this mold of like the evil, leftist, and it's impossible for people to see that someone can have both political perspectives that are outside of the norm, but also push a social gospel that is an active representation of the godly ideas that Jesus and Gandhi and other people were pursuing through pacifistic means. Does that enrage you, or is that something you're not familiar with?
It has the tendency to enrage me, but what I've come to believe and see, it's just normal. We need to tear people down, especially people who are examples of what is good. We do it all the time. We did it to Jesus himself, right? If there's any one human being who reflected what Jesus is, it would have been Jesus. And everybody tried everything to discredit Jesus. In my new book, I quote Mother Teresa. I quote Gandhi numerous times about the path to Christianity. Gandhi was a big fan of the teachings of Jesus. But all those quotes, guess what people are doing now with both Mother Teresa and Gandhi? They're discrediting both of them. Okay. So if you can discredit Martin Luther King, if you can discredit Jesus Christ, if you can discredit Mother Teresa and Gandhi, you can discredit anybody. And frankly, any of these humans, if you look deep enough, you're going to find some dirt. You're going to find out that they actually are human. They made some mistakes. They did stuff they probably would regret if you asked them. So they did screw stuff up. But if we try and leverage that to discredit who they are as people, then frankly, they're in a really good group of people, because we discredit people we admire. We discredit people like that because we know we don't look like that way. And so the only way for us to feel better about ourselves is to discredit them. So while it has a tendency to make me angry, I also realize this is just what we do. We discredit really good people because we feel bad about ourselves.
Well, one thing that the atheist community would do to discredit Christianity is that it's too passive. If you look at the writings of Nietzsche and other people, even the people who were coming after Martin Luther King, other ministers were saying that they actually were saying that he was too active, that they needed to be more passive. And passivity in the sense of, I'm going to pray that we get better leaders. I'm going to just take care of my circle of influence and not put myself out there. I'm going to, you know, lead a Bible study where we focus on the teachings of Jesus, but I'm going to let all the preachers steal the money and manipulate the congregants. Like, where does it become the need for like a revolution? Because now you have people that are also questioning Martin Luther King and Malcolm X as not going far enough. That unless there's a full dismantling of the system we're in, there's never going to be justice for the poor. There's never going to be racial equality. There's never going to be an ability to get ahead. That the system is so rigged and so evil that it has to be completely revolted against. How would you respond to the idea that all those people you're quoting are just pushovers and their impact took years and now is even being twisted to justify the dominating system, which is not helpful to anyone?
Yeah, so I think the challenge here is that if you actually looked at, for example, the person of Jesus, the guy was not passive, yet he preached pacifism. So somewhere in here, there's this balance. Jesus never instructed any of us to be passive, but he instructed all of us to be pacifists. That sounds like an oxy. It sounds like a ridiculous statement, right? But it's very true. It is the person of Martin Luther King Jr. The guy was a pacifist, but the reality is he was the most activist person that ever existed. He found how to live this balance, live this dichotomy between pacifism and activism, both of which represent the person of Jesus Christ. Gandhi, right? The most violent thing Gandhi ever did was a hunger strike. The most violent thing he ever did was something entirely pacifistic, right? Pacifism is activism. And that's where we get lost in all this. And the other thing we tend to do is we tend to blame people. He wasn't active enough. He wasn't passive enough. There's no way to win this war. And the fact of the matter is that we, even if take speaking of apartheid, oh my gosh, his name's failing me.
Nelson Mandela.
Thank you, sir, very much. So people say Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. In fact, he was labeled as a terrorist in the U.S. He was on a terrorism list, and he was in jail. Was he a terrorist or was he a freedom fighter? And all this stuff begins to meld together. And the fact of the matter is, every human being out there, they've got the good and the bad. All of this is at war within each one of us. Each one of them individually has driven a tremendous amount of change into our world, however they did it. Now, does that solve the world? No. I've read a quote recently that says, you know what? You're in the world. There's no fixing that. So it still requires each of us. I think I've got several quotes with Nietzsche in my book. You brought him up. He's a fascinating guy. His view on religion and in social justice and things like that. Fascinating. But the fact of the matter is, not any one of us are going to be able to fix a broken world. And that also is a theological perspective. Utopia won't exist. The challenge for us is to live eternally, is to live our own lives in a way that is activist and pacifist at the same time. I realize it's a dichotomy, but that's the challenge. That's the challenge that Jesus gave us. And it's the life that Martin Luther King showed us. It's the life that Gandhi showed us. Mother Teresa showed us as well. These are people who show us how to fight from a pacifist perspective.
Let's say that I was leading the Republican Party of Texas, and I wanted you to come and tell us how the conservative movement has gone wrong. What would you tell the crowd, and how would you win them over?
Ooh, that's that's a tough speech right there, my friend. um, Anytime you're having a speech to somebody and tell them what they've done wrong, it's not going to go well. But I think what I would do, even anymore today, even resting on scripture, to your point, among conservative Texans or Southern Baptists or whatever, that's dangerous also because uh, very often, even though they're conservative Christians, they don't like the teachings of Jesus. So it's very, very challenging in that regard. The thing I would do is kind of what I've already described is I would tell them my own experiences as a white conservative American male, the things that I saw through the eyes of black adopted kids. Not to say black is good, white is bad, but to say this stuff is real. This stuff is real. And individually, if we're willing to be broken in humility and to actually listen to each other, to actually care, that we can actually make the world better. The challenge is it's not going to get votes. Therein lies a challenge. In our system, it's not going to get votes. Anger is what gets votes. Therein lies a challenge, is it does require all of us. And if we're groups of politicians, it gets even worse because then they know their job is at stake. They're in a tough spot because they know their job is at stake if they have a compassionate message as a conservative Republican. It's very, very difficult to maintain that. Most of them that I've known, and I've had some Republicans right in my backyard, I voted for because they are that kind of person. But guess what? They got run out. So it's very difficult.
Are you afraid that, based on what you just shared, that fascism and more of a totalitarian regime can come about? Because a lot of people say, "Oh, well, we know that the Nazis were liberal because they um, they wanted socialized medicine, and they wanted um, I don't know, like euthanasia and abortion, and they were trying to make everybody the same, and they police language and this and that." But from my knowledge, they started off progressive in the sense of they were trying to push for those things, and then nobody cared. So then they went more traditionalist, and they started talking about the fatherland, about nativism, about uh, keeping the blood pure, about racial, purity, and getting rid of minorities and stuff like that. So the fear could be that either extremes could lead to some type of fascist regime. But at this time, with the Republican majority, with the cult of Trump, with all the um, stuff you shared about how they're getting rid of immigrants, demonizing Black people, and mistreating the poor, do you think that we're in the tipping point where it can really quickly become militarized and completely taking away people's rights to justify their power?
They were close. I don't know how to relate it directly to the Nazi experience. And I think it oftentimes is. We oftentimes do attempt to relate it to Nazism. I don't know that that's accurate, whether it's from a liberal or conservative standpoint. What I do believe about the Nazi development was that it was born out of World War One. Germany felt beat down, and they felt a burning desire to be great again. That's what concerns me the most, is whenever a people's burning desire is to be great again. That's when danger and harm can come to whoever the least expecting. In the case of Nazi Germany, it was the Jews, right? And this drive to become great again is the drive that will ultimately do us in. Whether that drive is led by liberals or conservatives, I don't think matters. But when our heart is really based on a need to satiate a desire to be great, and that greatness is defined by anything other than the greatness as defined by Christ, whether you're a Christian or not doesn't matter. A greatness defined by compassion and mercy and generosity and caring, then we're in trouble. And so, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, um, history doesn't often repeat itself, but it usually rhymes. I think that is what could very easily happen. We could say, yes, there's tendencies here. Is it going to be identical? No. But we could certainly end up in a very, very bad spot if this addiction to becoming great again really takes over to the extent that it did then.
Well, then the other phrase is might is right. So the more powerful, the stronger, the more respect, and the more ability to create cohesive system. So you mentioned that Donald Trump's positive trait is that he exudes compassion or interest, empathy towards the people, but that's also one of the characteristics of a manipulator. That they'll beat you and then they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I never meant to do that. You're so precious to me, but you're worthless to anybody else. I'm the only one who cares about you." Kind of domestic violence style perpetrator. So not only does he have that, the ability to kind of hypnotize people, but he also has the ability to impart some type of desire for success. So I was telling my friend, I knew he was going to win early on because he represented a system that works. And what I mean by that is that everybody's used to the Protestant ethic, everybody's used to the American style of governance and their might in the world in the military sense and commercially and stuff like that. And then the Democrats were focused on identity issues, on feminist and anti-patriarchy things, and they were trying to represent a new way of doing things, which was a little more socialistic and more, integrative of different perspectives. And most people were scared. They're like, we've seen that with Obama, and it didn't really work out. We've seen that with Biden, it didn't really work out, and now we want to get back to what we know. So Trump was almost like the 1950s guy by saying, I want to make America great again. It's like, I want this Leave It to Beaver, hardworking, dedicated people, no more trying to right all the wrongs. We're just going to take care of ourselves. That's why I thought he was so capable of winning people over. Do you see that? Or do you see it as more of an ability for people to look past his issues and see other possibilities and other alternatives?
No, and I don't know that Donald Trump is particularly compassionate or caring about any other individual than himself. I think that's core to narcissism. I think to your exact point, narcissists are very capable of manipulating empathy in order to get actions that they desire. So empathy can be manipulated in order to get votes, right? And so, in that regard, I think from a narcissistic perspective, there is a lot of manipulation of empathy going on there. But I think the challenge is that this message of being great again is so addictive. Everybody wants to be great again. Everybody just defines it differently. And in this particular case, the way Trump was defining it, isolationists, less taxation, all the things he was defining as to what great looks like, might, right? Military might, rooting out the rapists and terrorists, the bad guys, and even coming against the transgender community. Generally speaking, in our country, we don't like transgender people. So when he came out against them, for what purpose? Who knows? Because it coalesces us together so that we feel like he has empathy for us who also don't like transgender people, right? So it's a manipulative empathy, but the drive that really coalesces us together is the simple message: let's be great again. And for whatever reason in our culture, whether it's a desire to return to the 50s or a desire for more economic prosperity, we wanted that. We wanted to be great again, just like Nazi Germany. Being great again is a very intoxicating message. It's a great message. It's in all in how you define greatness. And then conservatives, to your point, turn that on Democrats. Democrats appeared to have a message that says we're not great, we're terrible, we're mean to black people, we're mean to Latin Americans, we're mean to the poor, and they just kept talking about how bad we are. And Trump kept talking about how great we could be. Well, which of those two are you going to vote for? You know, that's exactly the point you're making. So I think the messaging is that the addictive part of it is we're all addicted to becoming great again. It's all in how you define what greatness looks like.
But the one challenge from the Latino community, and I'm not the representative of the community, but I know a lot about what makes us tick. And one aspect that the American public doesn't understand is that we are politically progressive, but morally traditionalist. And the political progressiveness comes from being disappointed by all the politicians and leaders of our countries and then running them to the ground. And the moral traditional stuff comes from heartfelt religious perspectives, either Catholic, Protestant, or in my case, Jewish. So what I would propose is that if a Christian guy like you came to me and said, "Hey man, we just want to love everyone and we want to bring unity and everybody's welcome and we want everyone to feel as they have a place on the table," I automatically, just like you were saying, put my fist up because I would be like, this guy's just a hippie, and the hippiness leads to complete, chaos and lack of moral compass. And the other guys might say, we hate everybody, but we want a Christian nation that is old school, whatever. And I would also have problems with that because it feels like it's like a religious regime, like in Iran, but from a Christian perspective. So, what is a balanced, helpful way for people to feel comfortable? Because the reason that I feel that religion has lost its power is because it's become polarized. Also, it's either all love or all strength and justice. There's not this sense of balance that comes from, hey, the God of the Bible is both a warrior God of justice and wrath, but he's also merciful and compassionate. So there's a middle ground that comes from knowing both abilities to understand the world from a spiritual perspective, without it becoming so mushy and completely disconnected from the reality that we live in a very brutal world, and there's a lot of things that need to happen for people to feel safe, to feel that they can pursue their dreams. Like, one guy kept on saying, if you let the Democrats win, they're going to turn this into a third world country. And I thought that was very powerful because some of us coming from third world countries were like, no, we can't have it become like that. Like, it almost seemed like they didn't have a plan. They were just letting things happen. And that's what creates a lot of fear from voters.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and this is what my second book has been about, is really understanding whether you're a Christian or not doesn't matter, but really understanding the message of Jesus, the fact that there is strength, there is activism and passivism, there is power, and there's grace. There's these things held together. And the fascinating part of it for me is that a great deal of what we call whatever the moral right in our company, our country, the Christian right, the religious right, are really supporting a terrifically irreligious governance right now. So while there's this idea that republicanism, conservatism is Christian, it's incredibly immoral. And so there's a discrepancy that's going on about who the person of Jesus Christ actually is. And I think if we, whether or not, again, you believe Jesus is the pathway to heaven or whatever, okay, but what I'm talking about is the ability to actually be strong as Jesus was and be compassionate as Jesus was. You can contain both of those ideas in one ethos. An example, two examples I'll give you. Um, the last two Republicans I voted for president, George H.W. Bush and John McCain, especially. John McCain had a tremendous ability to be strong, have strong, uh, centralizing idea of what good was, and to be able to bring together strength. But he was also one of the most compassionate, uh, level-headed human beings I've ever met. I saw him defend Barack Obama in a, uh, there's a what do they call it, town hall where he was debating Barack Obama, and one of the people in his town hall said, "Hey, he's against us. He's an Arab or something like that." John McCain defended him. When does that happen anymore in today's world? Right? So such a person as John McCain, that person does exist, right? Whether it's Republican or Democrat, those people can exist. And so somehow, how do we depolarize to say, in fact, that's the person we need? The challenge is going to be that, because anymore in the Republican regime, it's very, very difficult to get back there. And also in the Democratic regime, we're no longer trying to point at each other and say, this is what's good about you. This is what I can learn from you. This is what I can learn about you. This is how I can be better myself. Anybody, whether Republican or Democrat, will only get votes if they are 100% against the other person. We're in a pickle here, no doubt about it.
Okay, we have
But
10
it is,
more minutes. Um, and this might turn into another conversation. We can always meet up again next week. But I cannot believe that you're saying that John McCain and George H. Bush were actually good people. And I'll tell you why. So I came to the U.S. when the first Bush was president, and now that I know his background, now that I have some understanding of the first Iraq War and all the stuff that he was doing, he was a continuation of the Reagan presidency, which under the hype that it was pushed, it seemed as the most wonderful, and he was so capable, and he had so much, abilities. But the guy was like as much of a crook as Nixon, and had all kinds of deals with the Iranians and selling arms and pushing drugs and all this stuff. And then the head of the CIA at that time became the president. So his son and him are like some of the most corrupt people in the world. And then McCain started off good. He was very friendly. He was very nice. He would be on all the political TV shows, and he was very middle of the road. Well, when he saw that he couldn't win like that, then he became a warmonger, and he was pushing for the bombing of Iran early on. So even though maybe you met him, maybe you know stuff about him, he appeared to be a very like middle of the road kind of person. They both created the environment that now we're dealing with. They set it up to have someone like Trump come in because they started turning hateful, and they started going towards the Rush Limbaugh style of politics, which is destroy the other side. And maybe at first they weren't like that, but they were manipulators, and they used their power to hunt down people and to destroy them. So I don't understand how those people represent positive side of the Republican Party.
well, you're right. It probably is another conversation. But the reality, I think, is that just like people finding, issues, maybe even very legitimate issues about Martin Luther King or Gandhi or any of these people, we can find things that destroy each other, right? It's going to happen. The reality is power corrupts. That's not a new saying. It's been around forever. And the reason is because it does. Power corrupts. whether you're a Republican president or, to your point, a Democratic president. Power corrupts. And so, to a great extent, once people, whether Republican or Democrat, get to these positions, they become corrupted. There's no doubt about that. The challenge in front of us is really to sort through and try and see the best we can. And you know what? We can't see perfectly, right? The best we can do is, given the context, is constantly weigh that balance that's in front of us of compassion versus strength. And it's a tough balance. And whenever at the end of the day, your drive is votes, you will become corrupted, whether you're Republican or Democrat or whoever. Otherwise, you won't get the votes and you won't be there. So, any politician, whether you go all the way back to the Roman government, right? This is a power corrupting system. And the only way they can succeed is through their own uh, echo chamber, to use lack of a better word, their own speeches, their own taglines, and to become what it is people will vote for. And therein lies the root of the issue. We're voting for these people, right? The problem is us. The problem is not them. The problem is that we are, in general, it's very difficult to be gracious. It's difficult to be compassionate in our own daily lives. It's incredibly difficult to be generous, to give away our own wealth. We all look for a government that can be what we want them to be, but we can't be that our own selves in our own lives. Therein lies the real challenge. Not necessarily how we can overhaul an entire government, but how we as individuals can be what the whole government we hope for could actually look like. Therein lies the challenge. How can I be that? How can I be powerful and compassionate at the same time? How can I be gracious and generous at the same time? How can I be a structure and rules, but how can I also have mercy and grace? If I can't do it in my own soul, I can't tell somebody else how to do it either. So the challenge to us is, how do we be those people that we want to admire? That's the challenge. It's in our own hearts.
And last quick questions. In your church leadership, do you see more of an ability to keep people accountable and for people to be more connected to their source, which is the Bible and teaching of Jesus? Or is it easy for those religious folks to also become corrupted based on the whims of their following?
Corruption is hand in hand. I'm not a pastor anymore, by the way, just to be clear. I work in corporate America, so corporate America, the church, corruption is right at hand. We hear what we want to hear because we need to feel good about ourselves, especially in the areas where we're afraid we're not good, right? So while the Bible is our source, we pick and choose what's in the Bible to aid our desire to feel good about ourselves, to feel important, to feel like we matter, because that's, again, shame talking. So even whether we're using the Bible or the Quran or any other religious book, the challenge is the same. The challenge is to be challenged, to be the people that those books actually represent. All of them: Quran, the Old Testament, the law. Even Jesus said, I don't dismiss the law and the prophets at all. I embrace them. But we have to understand that they're about mercy, right? So I love the books. The problem is we're not good at reading them, and we're not good at taking it personally. We're good at telling other people what they should do with that information, because that helps us feel good about ourselves. It puts us in a position of power, and power corrupts. So it's a challenge, whether you're in the church, corporate America, politics, even in your own family. It's a challenge.
If you can tell our audience where they can find your books and what have you written so far, and then would you like to come back on the show and talk about the masculinity complex that a lot of these issues come from men being insecure and wanting to find some type of validation through their misbehavior or their lack of security in the things they do?
Sure. I mean, I love having conversations with everybody, so I'm happy to come back. And the easiest way to find me is just type in Rick Patterson Connects, Connects. Rick Patterson Connects. It'll take you to my website. It'll take you to my YouTube page. It'll take me to my Facebook. Rick Patterson Connects. One word. That's the easiest way to find me.
And real quick, the names of your books.
The first book is Shame Unmasked, Disarming the Hidden Driver Behind Our Destructive Decisions. And my upcoming book is a book called The Matthew Challenge, Christ Beyond Christianity, Living Beyond Religion.
Wonderful. We want to thank you for being a good sport. I know it's very challenging questions that I threw your way, but here we want to make sure to get to the deep reasons for things happening, and we want to open people's horizons to new ideas. So thank you for your time and your ability to share your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate being on. It was a lot of fun, really, sincerely. Thank you.
Take care, man.